Good morning again. Good to see everyone. I want to do a message today. It's a little different. It's really kind of uber practical. Some messages I strive for a little bit. I can't be really deep, I don't think, but I strive to be a little more maybe doctrinal or theological. But at the same time, it's very interesting to me that the Bible is probably the most practical book you'll ever meet. Jesus taught. It's funny too, he came and he could have rolled out the scrolls and he could have basically overwhelmed the scribes and Pharisees with his knowledge, seeing as how he inspired it. It'd be kind of like me lecturing on my autobiography. And yet he didn't. Jesus taught really practical stuff. Jesus talked about fishing trips and farming, and Jesus taught practical stuff for practical people because life is practically going on every day around us, isn't it? And what we learn from the Bible, first of all, needs to color our thinking of God, but it also needs to color our thinking and our vision of the world around us, in which we are His hands, we are His feet, we are His means of doing practical things. So I want to talk a little bit today. The title of the message is Five Smooth Stones, and it's probably a familiar reference to you, but I want to talk a little bit about giants, and maybe thinking about who or what are the giants in your life. And maybe you're very fortunate and you don't have one, but I want to give you a few statistics that will make you feel like if you do have a giant in your life, you're not alone. Let me give you just a few statistics about Americans. Some of them are prey to the giant of addiction. 1 in 10 Americans is addicted to drugs or alcohol. That's a high number. That means 1 out of every 10 people you meet has a substance abuse problem. 1 in 8 online searches is for erotic material, so the addiction to porn is even higher than the addiction to substance abuse. So for some people, that's the giant in the room, and maybe for you, maybe it is substance abuse, maybe it's pain relievers, or maybe it's something immoral in your life that you've allowed to. It started as just a weed you should have pulled and didn't, and it's grown into more, and suddenly it's a tree and it's standing in the room with you. You're not alone. In fact, 1/10 of the people that you pass every day struggle with the same thing you do. I'll tell you a big one, and in fact, this is the one that started me thinking on this. This was what started the whole snowball. Is I started thinking about the giant that is debt. Personal debt, organizational debt, and we have been, if you don't know, we've been looking at another house and putting ours on the market and things like that. So we've been thinking about things like debt to income ratio. That's what got me started on this. And at the same time, of course, there is the business of the church. And I realize how much our lives are controlled by debt. According to a 2013 study, as churches, now I'm not just talking about us as individuals, at the end of 2015, the average American household had over $130,000 in debt. The average, and there's a whole bunch of them that had to average zeros into that. So that means an awful lot, the ones that actually had debt, the number was over 200,000, that the average American family is in debt. And organizationally, it's crippling too. I've looked at some statistics for churches, and these are all evangelical churches in the United States. Because of the debt and salary and those type things, structures, expenses, the average American church, according to the Evangelical Christian Credit Union, uses only 3% of their total budget for children's and youth programs, 2% for adult programs, and less than 1% for local and national benevolence, for helping the poor or the hungry or whatever. In other words, only about 6% of the average American church budget can go for programs for their people and programs for those in need, because we are choked by this monster, this giant in the room, which is debt. And you might think, well, I got mine under control. I'm going to ask you just real quickly, there's a little exercise that I've seen Debbie use in one of the courses she teaches about time management. And she has people write on a card, if time and money were no issue, what would you do? And you don't have to write it unless you just want to write it on your bulletin. But I want you to answer that for yourself right now. If time and money were no issue, what would you do? You might say, I'd build a recording studio and make records. I would paint. I would travel. I would build churches. I mean, maybe it's a very spiritual thing. Maybe it's not so spiritual. Maybe it's just I would put my kids in the finest private schools or whatever. Whatever that thing is for you, now look at it and ask yourself why you're not doing it. It's dead, probably. Because most of our time that we don't have is because we're working to pay off what? Debt. So the point is, for many of us, this is a giant we face. It is debt. For others, maybe it's addiction. Let me give you another one. I'm just giving you 4 or 5 to help you maybe identify in your own life. Or you might leave going, hallelujah, I'm the luckiest person on the earth, because I don't have any of those. How about anxiety or depression? According to the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, did you know there was one of those? 18% of Americans age 18 or older suffer from anxiety disorders, and 17% will suffer from major extended periods of depression in their lifetime. And at any one time, 3 to 5% of Americans are suffering from major depression. Maybe it's broken trust or broken relationships. I'm going to move through these quickly. There's a couple more. A 2011 study by the Family Research Council found that only 46% of children in the United States will reach the age of 17 living in intact homes with married biological parents. And that's not a real groundbreaking statistic to us, as we know marriages end in divorce as often as they don't. But the point is, for some of us, the giant in the room is a broken relationship. Either one that has separated or one that hasn't in reality, but practically it has. You're on opposite sides. You're not going the same direction. You're constantly at enmity with each other. You're at war with each other. Maybe it's an estranged kid, or maybe it's a relationship with your parent or someone else, but these broken relationships that seem like giants, they just seem like there is no fix. You remember the old movie, Irreconcilable Differences? That's what a giant looks like as a broken relationship. There's no way to fix this. It's just too big. There's just too much water under the bridge. Let me give you another one. Unemployed or underemployed. There's all sorts of different statistics about unemployment, but I got this one off CNN's website, and this is simple to understand. According to CNN, only 62% of Americans over age 16 have a job. Now, we can talk about 5% unemployment rate, but only 62% of Americans over age 16 have a job. According to Monster.com, another 22 million are underemployed, which means they're not able to get the job that they're qualified for. They're having to work at something that pays less, maybe part-time instead of full-time. But between those numbers, 4 in 10 adults are actually employed. And maybe that's the monster in your room. Maybe that's the giant you're facing is been out of work, or I've had to settle for something much less than what I'm qualified for, and that one a couple up, debt keeps mounting up because I'm not working, or I'm not able to make what I feel like I should be able to make, and I don't know the answer. I've been looking. I've sent out resumes to people I don't even know. I've beaten the bushes. I've called everybody I do know. They got caller ID. They don't even answer anymore. I've done everything I know to do. And if you're facing one of these, it doesn't mean you're unspiritual. You haven't prayed about it. We all know that God doesn't always answer prayer exactly on our schedule, don't we? Or am I the only one that experiences that? You guys all got it? Let me give you just a couple others. I'm not going to give you any statistics particularly, but controllable health issues like, I am going to give you statistics. Over 50% of Americans are at higher risk for cardiovascular issues because of inactivity. Over 35% of Americans are adults or obese. 18% smoke, which is another thing that can lead to various health issues. And then grief. The loss of someone can seem like I'll never get past this. I can never overcome this. It's just too big. My life without him or her is just not worth living. Now, probably the most famous giant story in history is in the Bible. And you guys are mostly probably all familiar with it, whether you've really read it and studied it, or whether you've just heard it told. All you got to do is watch the NCAA basketball tournament every spring, the big dance, and they talk about the Davids and the Goliaths. And so I want to talk a little bit about that story this morning, and I want to talk in particular about how David faced a giant, because I think for you and me, maybe I can give you some practical ways to stare that giant down that's standing in front of you. In his case, it was a real live person. And it's in 2 Samuel 17. No, 1 Samuel 17. Sam was just starting to talk. 1 Samuel 17, and the story begins with the army of Israel's in a valley called the Valley of Elah, and they're facing the Philistines, who are their main foes. And they're each along their battle lines, and suddenly out walks this giant. And he says, I got an idea, guys. Instead of all of us killing each other, you send me one guy, your champion, and he and I will fight. And whoever loses, that army and that nation will become slaves of the other one. And this guy happened to be about 9 feet tall and huge and trained as a warrior. And so Israel, along with their king Saul, are petrified. It's just too big. He's just too big. He's standing between us and our freedom. He's standing between us and our lives. And yet, he's just too big. And David comes along. David is sent, actually, he's only 16 at this point. His dad sends him on a mission. His older brothers are in the army. And so David's dad sends David with some food for them, like, hey, they've had enough hardtack and K rations. Let's send them some food from home. And so he shows up with food, and while he's there, this giant comes out and gives his spiel. And David, of course, goes, who does he think he is? And word gets back to Saul that David says, who does he think he is? I'd like to teach him a thing or two. And so Saul calls David in. Probably starts out with that kind of talk's not really good from a teenager when all our soldiers are scared of this guy. But eventually David turns his thinking around, and Saul goes, well, nobody else wants the privilege. Why don't you go fight him? And in verse 38 of 1 Samuel 17, it says, then Saul gave David his own armor, a bronze helmet, and a coat of mail. So he dresses David up. And Saul's a big man. The Bible says he stood a head taller than anyone else in Israel. David, as a teenager, probably looked like the pictures of when little boys try on their dad's shoes, and they stick way out, and the suits and the coats. My dad's would still be like that on me. But anyway, David put it on, strapped the sword over it, took a step or two to see what it was like, for he had never worn such things before. I can't go in these, he protested to Saul. In other words, these don't really fit. In verse 40, and that's the verse I want to kind of center on today, he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into his shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with his shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Now, can I start with this observation? If I were called on to go fight a giant, I wouldn't pick smooth stones. My first thought would be I'd want the most jagged, big, ugly, hurt. When they hurt to pick them up, they're razor sharp. That's the kind of stones I'd want. Why in the world would David pick up smooth ones? They might just glance off. But David had a particular weapon he knew how to use, called a sling. And he knew, first of all, that well-rounded, smooth stones were more aerodynamic. They would fly more true. They would come out of the sling more correctly than something jagged that might catch on the material. They wouldn't, if he was having to dig in, he was putting them in his pouch, he's having to dig in quick and get, if you got a 9-footer coming at you, you're not going to take your time probably and test the wind. If I'm having to reach in quick, jagged ones will be hard to get out, and they might cut my hand doing it. So David chose something easy to handle. And that's what I want to try to give us today, is 5 easy to handle principles for facing giants. 5 smooth stones, not big, jagged, and razor sharp, like memorize the entire Old Testament and quote it to him. But I'm going to try to give us 5 things that we can use They're practical. They're easy to use. They're easy to handle. And so the first one is purpose. And you'll never slay your giant until your why becomes bigger than your why not. Verse 8, Goliath stood and shouted a taunt across to the Israelites. I'm going to show you David's why. Because David had a different why than anyone else in that army. Goliath shouted, "Why are you all coming out to fight? I'm the Philistine champion, but you're only servants of Saul. Choose one man to come down here and fight me. If he kills me, then we will be your slaves, but if I kill him, you'll be our slaves. I defy the armies of Israel today. Send me a man who will fight me." Now, here's what everybody else thought. Verse 11, when Saul and the Israelites heard this, they were terrified and deeply shaken. When David heard it, he says, "What will a man get for killing this guy and ending his defiance of Israel? Who is this pagan Philistine anyway that he's allowed to defy the armies of the living God?" David says, our freedom, our lives, and our God are bigger. That purpose, defending our God's honor, defending our country, defending our freedom, is bigger than my why not. It's bigger than, yeah, but what if he kills me? In other words, for each of us, there has to kill this giant, we have to reach a point where we go, that must be done. I don't want to live in a world that's not true in. This purpose. I don't want to live in a world, I don't want to live any longer. I'm not willing to stay with the status quo. And I want to give you an example of this. A few years ago, I was in a band, and I traveled with a particular guy, and all of us, as you would imagine, we played a lot of late night concerts, and we ate really late at night, and we ate junk food because late at night, guess what? The local vegetable place isn't cooking. But Crystal is, and Burger King, and Taco Bell's drive-through windows till 2 a.m. And we ate, and we all talked about how we need to stop. And we all bought bigger clothes because we gained weight. I was really thin when I started that. I was not as thin by the time that ended. There was one of the guys that he was like the rest of us. It was, yeah, I need to. Yeah, I should. Yeah, I need to kill that giant. I need to eat healthier. I need to eat at the right times and all this. And we would come home ever so often and be home for 2 or 3 days at a time before we went back out on the road. One time we come back to the bus and we find out he has had a diagnosis of diabetes. The doctor has scared him pretty well. He's got the syringe and give himself the shots in the stomach and all this. And while the rest of us still ate pizza and Taco Bell late at night, Howard got healthy. Howard lost weight. Howard could wear some of the old clothes that we had outgrown. Howard got healthy because his why became bigger than his why not. Sometimes, if health is our issue, it takes a doctor scaring us. I've known people that their cardiologist got their attention, and suddenly, even though it's hot, and even though it might rain, they go out and walk because their why is bigger than their why not. For you and I to face the giant in our life, our why, our who is he to defy God's army? Who does he think he is defying the armies of the living God? Has got to be bigger than our what if I fail. Secondly, priorities. Your why must rank above your what else. Verse 28, David's oldest brother Eliab heard David talking to the man. He was angry. "What are you doing around here anyway?" he demanded. "What about those few sheep you're supposed to be taking care of?" In other words, what about that other stuff you're supposed to be doing? Which was a legitimate question, right? David had sheep to care for. Not his. He worked for a guy, his dad. He also, didn't the last I remember, just a few verses before, wasn't he on a mercy mission with grain and food and bread and cheese for the brothers? They're going, what about our bread? What about our cheese? And don't you have some sheep back at home? And all of those were really good reasons for David to have said, you know what? You guys are soldiers. Why don't y'all deal with this giant? I got sheep to keep. And the giant will continue to stand in our face until our why becomes more important than our what else. If you think killing a giant will be one of the many things you'd focus on, it's not how it happens. Not only do we have to have a purpose, that purpose has to become our priority. I talked a few weeks ago about how our schedule literally shouldn't be just like our referee to tell us what we do. It ought to be a picture of who we're becoming. And that happens through priorities. That happens through putting the main thing, the first thing first. It happens by saying, this is what has to be. And that's what a purpose gives you. It's, this must be done. This must be accomplished. We as individuals, we as an organization, will never kill the giants in our lives until we say, don't want another minute of this world without this purpose being accomplished. I'm not willing to be happy with the fact that 82% of Chattanooga is at home today instead of at church. I'm not willing to be happy with the fact that 5 billion people are lost on this earth, that if you line them up, chest to back, all the way around the world, built bridges over the oceans, lined them up, coast to coast, across the Pacific, across Asia, across Europe, back across the Atlantic, right in this door, the lost people on their way to hell would wrap around the earth 47 times. Until that bothers us enough to say, this is a priority, as an organization, we won't kill the giants in front of us. And as individuals, until our health, until our debt, until whatever that thing is that is coloring everything else in your life and you're having to deal with everything else, and what you would do if time and money were no issue, you'll never get to as long as it doesn't become the main thing. And so it has to be our purpose. It has to color our priorities and organize our priorities. The third thing is, the third stone in his pouch was persistence. Your why must overcome the question, why continue? Why not give up? David said to Saul, I'll go fight him. Don't be ridiculous, Saul replied. There's no way you can fight this Philistine and possibly win. You're only a boy and he's been a man of war since his youth. This would be the good place when the king and the head of the army tells you, not interested, boy, to go. Well, I do have those sheep and that cheese, and that guy's really big. Verse 34, but David persisted. I've been taking care of my father's sheep and goats, he said. When a lion or bear comes to steal a lamb from the flock, I go after it with a club and rescue the lamb from its mouth. If the animal turns on me, I catch it by the jaw and club it to death. I've done this to both lions and bears, and I'll do it to this pagan Philistine too, for he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the claws of the lion and the bear will rescue me from this Philistine. Can I point out that there were several opportunities to take an exit ramp before this? Me in a club fighting a lion sounds like a good off-ramp. He got a sheep. I got lots of sheep. There's only one me. Lions and bears and me with a stick. Those are excellent opportunities to jump right off the freeway and drive some back roads for a while. Yet by the time David persists with Saul and won't take no for an answer, he's already had to persist through lions, bears. He's had to persist through his brother trying to shut him down and go, just go back and take care of the sheep. You're getting on my nerves. He had to make his point made to other soldiers around until one of them got the word to Saul. Look how hard David has had to just stick with it. Just keep saying. He doesn't start by killing a giant. He starts by not taking no for an answer. He starts by persisting. He starts by facing the lion in front of him, the bear in front of him, the soldiers in front of him, the brother in front of him, and finally the king in front of him and says, you're no match for this guy. And David just keeps going, you know what? I'm going to keep walking forward. I'm going to keep persisting. So the third tool, the third stone in you may have to do that. Because guess what? Here's a news flash for all of us. My former pastor used to make this statement. He'd say, God's a good God. And everybody go, yeah. And he'd say, and the devil's a good devil. And everybody go, yeah. You have an enemy. I have an enemy. Discouragement is one of his favorite, if not his favorite tool. The Bible tells me that the joy of the Lord is my strength. Now, What does discouragement take care of? Any joy in our lives? Any strength we have? And so there has got to be this thing in us that says today, tomorrow, the day after, you can bring that noise back, but I'm going to keep walking. I'm going to keep taking a step forward. You don't kill giants often with the first stone. David happens to. But David, it wasn't his first fight. David had fought a lot to get the opportunity to fight this giant. And so in our lives, whatever that, if that's substance abuse, you're going to stumble, you're going to fall back. If it's a relationship, you're still going to fight some. If it's debt, it's going to feel like you've been making payments and nothing's happened when you try to discipline yourself in that area. And yet, your why's got to overcome your why not give up, your why continue question. Because you're going to get that question. I promise you, no one kills a giant without having to answer, why not give up? Why are you bothering? The friend of mine I told you about with diabetes, when he first started dieting, he was 60, 70 pounds overweight. Now, if you're 5 over, you can take care of that in a week. He also couldn't afford to just not eat because of his blood sugar. So he was looking at 1.5 years to get his weight under control. That's a long time of no Twinkies. That's a long time of no butter on the bread you didn't eat. I mean, it's easy for that to go, I think I'd rather die than do that. The point was, he had enough purpose, he made it a priority, and he persisted. Not 1 week while we ate at Taco Bell. He watched us eat Taco Bell and Pizza Hut at night on the bus for 1.5 years. And then we all wish we were him, other than the shots in the stomach part. I never wished for that. The fourth stone, patience. Your why's got to be bigger than your when. Is this ever going to happen? Than that desire to give up because it hasn't happened. Verse 40 says, he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into a shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with the shepherd's staff and sling, he started across the valley to fight the Philistines. We can draw a few conclusions from this. First of all, David was in it for the long haul. If not, you pick up 1 stone, right? Yes, Danny, thank you for bringing that up. Shake y'all's heads so I can hear them rattle. Y'all too quiet today. We can draw some conclusions from the fact he picked up 5 stones. And one is he planned on a drawn-out fight. Otherwise, you show up with a gun and 1 bullet, like Barney. That'll take care of it. He had a belt full because he knew he might need them. Secondly, he was prepared to hurl all 5 stones at Goliath. Now, I've heard wonderful ideas like, later we find that there were 4 other giants that were killed by some of David's mighty men, and David picked up 5 stones symbolically because he was going to take care of Goliath's 4 brothers and himself. And that might be true, but I'm going to guess that a teenager about to go fight a 9-footer wasn't thinking, I bet he's got brothers back home. And someday when I'm king in 35 years, I'll need these other rocks to give to other people. I'm pretty sure he wasn't thinking quite that far ahead. David thought, how many rocks will fit in my bags? What David thought, I'm going to guess. I doubt 5. He didn't pick up 5 because it was the number of grace. I think he said, how many rocks can I carry? Because it may take all of them. That's patience. That's saying, I didn't get in this place overnight, probably, in most cases. I'm not going to get out of it overnight. And I've got to have the patience to pull another stone out when the first one misses or the first one bounces off his shield, to pull another stone out, load it up, and shoot it. And then I got to pull another stone out. And next month, and maybe you're unemployed and you may say, I'm never going to get the job I want without a better education. You got to have the patience to sign up for that 1 online class. And for the next however many weeks, sit in front of your computer that night and the other nights. And then you got to sign up for the next one. And then you got to sign up for the next one. And when you're in the second one and you still got, it seems like 1,000 classes left, it sure seems like you're never going to knock that giant down. And yet, patience, persistence, patience are how we knock down giants. And the fifth stone, and this is important, and I certainly don't put this fifth because of prioritizing, but partnership. Your why must lead to your who. David, maybe not, could have handled a lion by himself. I don't know how big the lion was. Maybe it was a lion cub. Maybe not on a bear. But David had reached a point he absolutely couldn't handle on his own. David had reached an opponent that only with God's help was that giant going to fall. Verse 45, David replied to the Philistine, "You come to me with the sword, spear, and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of heaven's armies, the God of the armies of Israel whom you've defied." The God we sang about a minute ago, the God of angel armies. Verse 46, "Today the Lord will conquer you, and I will kill you and cut off your head, and then I'll give the dead bodies of your men to the birds and wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel." Notice he doesn't say that there's a new sheriff in town. There's a king on the way, if we can get this Saul guy out of the way. The whole world will know there's a God in Israel. There's the cause, isn't it? And everyone assembled here will know that the Lord rescues his people, but not with the sword and spear. This is the Lord's battle, and he will give you to us. To take down a giant, it takes more than you. And sometimes the greatest function, I hate saying this because I know it's true about me. Sometimes the greatest function of a giant in your life is to force you to solidify that partnership, to turn it over to God in a way that maybe up to this point you haven't had to rely on him in a way maybe you've never had to. You find people of great faith are people that have had great problems. As sad as that is to say, people don't walk on water when it's not storming. And it's, in David's case, I doubt he gave that speech to the lion, "You come to me with the claw and the fang, but I come to you in the name of the Lord." I'd say he just kind of did it as it came to him. But as he began to process that and realize there's a big, old, strong God up there that walks with me, he's now realized this thing's a partnership. And there's only one way I'm taking down that guy. There's only one way I'm taking down that addiction. There's only one way I'm taking down that financial dumpster fire that my life has become. There's only one way I'm taking down that busted, broken, mean, hate-filled relationship. And that is in partnership with God. Now, it is important to recognize what the word partnership means. Look back at verse 46 again. "Today the Lord will conquer you." The Lord will conquer you. "And I will kill you and cut off your head." You notice there's two people involved in this. David doesn't say, "Today I'll conquer you, kill you, and cut off your head." And he also doesn't say, "Lord will conquer you," then he's going to roll on in, grab your sword, and cut your head off. There's a reason that God works in partnership with us. Does anyone really doubt that the first day that Goliath came out and made his boast, God couldn't have zapped him, turned him into a piece of bacon with a lightning bolt? "I defy the army of Exodus." What was that now? I mean, there's a reason though. God chooses to use you and me. First of all, because we live by faith and not sight, and these things stretch our faith. And because we are at our strongest, Paul says, when we're weak. And when we recognize this is beyond me, God goes, bingo. Well, Paul kind of said that too. But when we realize there is no way I win this fight alone, God goes, perfect. You hadn't won any other ones alone. You just hadn't seen that till now. And sometimes that giant is exactly the thing that you have to look at and say, it's too big for me. But the other problem we can have is we can think it's all on God. You know, there's an old saying, I'm sure you may have heard it, pray like it depends on God and work like it all depends on you. Well, that's what partnership is about. And in fact, verse 40 says, he picked up 5 smooth stones from a stream and put them into his shepherd's bag. Then, armed only with the shepherd's staff and sling, 2 things, he started across the valley to fight the Philistine. Now, what are our staff and our sling? Our 2 things. And I want to read to you from a psalm. It's Psalm 18. I'm just going to read a little bit of it, but I'm going to show you the 2 things that I think come together when we go to war with a giant. Psalm 18, I'm going to read you the inscription. You know, on a psalm, it'll say, sons of Korah. It'll say who wrote it, and it'll say, according to Alamoth, which is female high-pitched voices, or according to Gittite, which was a Gittith harp, a 5-string. But anyway, here's the inscription on this psalm, Psalm 18. For the choir director, a psalm of David, the giant killer, the servant of the Lord. He sang this song to the Lord on the day the Lord rescued him from all his enemies and from Saul. So this is when David stands at the end. It's a few years after the Goliath moment. In fact, it's 20-something years after the Goliath moment, when David stands, having defeated his enemies, having overcome his enemies. And he points out 2 things. First of all, prayer. In other words, depending on God. Psalm 18, verse 1, I love you, Lord. You are my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress and my Savior. My God is my rock, in whom I find protection. He is my shield, the power that saves me in my place of safety. I called on the Lord, who is worthy of praise, and He saved me from my enemies. David recognized, first of all, God. When I face a giant, I pray, because God saves me. I call on the Lord, who's worthy of praise, and He saves me from my enemies. But David also recognized God does that often through our hands. And let me read a little further, because the second thing is prayer and preparation. Verse 32 says, God arms me. Listen to, now, in the first part, he kept saying He, God, He. The pronoun was all talking about God. Now listen to who is the active subject of the sentence now. God arms me with strength, and He makes my way perfect. He makes me as sure-footed as a deer, enabling me to stand on mountain heights. He trains my hands for battle. He strengthens my arm to draw a bronze bow. You've given me your shield of victory. Your right hand supports me. Your help has made me great. You've made a wide path for my feet to keep them from slipping. You've armed me with strength for the battle, and you've subdued my enemies under my feet. So as we face a giant, it's not only practical. Yes, it's spiritual. And the spiritual part is saying, Lord, I can't handle this guy alone. It starts there. But at the same time, if we're not careful, we pray that prayer, we sit down and wait on God to do it. Now he started meddling, hadn't he? I'm praying for you, brother. How many times you pass somebody in need and said, I'm praying for you? And they're going, I appreciate your prayers, but a sandwich, now that would be awesome. Or, Lord, help me lose weight. It takes both, doesn't it? And that's only because God designed it that way. God showed us in the first few verses of Genesis. He didn't need us. In the beginning, God got some guys together and said, I need heaven and earth. Could you all whip something together? God showed us when He made us that He didn't need us. The point is, we need Him, but we also need to know that He chooses to use us. Because we are created in His image, which means we are at our happiest. We are at our most fulfilled, not when we're sitting doing nothing, but when we are creating, and when we are speaking life into things, and when we are giving life, and when we are loving, and when we are helping, because that's how we are made, because God is love. And He looks at us and goes, you will live the most abundant, most fulfilled life if you are busy doing the things that He is passionate about, because I'm made just like Him. And so, right now, you're looking at a giant and you're in your own life and you're going, why? Why has that got to be there? Oh, what I could do without it. And God is going, come on. I train your hands for war. I strengthen your arms to pull a bronze bow. Because when you come through this, you're still going to have hands trained for war and strong arms. If I zap him off the planet, you'll be just as weak and just as faithless the next time. You also, quite possibly, when you conquer your giant, there may be a whole group of people waiting. When David kills Goliath, the entire army runs out behind him. They kill the other whole army, chase them, kill them, take all their stuff. That army wouldn't budge until somebody took down a giant. There may be people in your own life that are looking at you and they see this giant you're facing and they're waiting to see how you take down that giant. And when you do, you may very well find some other giant killers around you. You may raise up your own mighty men or mighty women that killed Goliath's brothers. They're facing these same things in their own life. And they need someone who can say to them, look, I know what that's like. I know what it's like to grieve. I know what it's like to be in a broken relationship. I know what it's like to be under a mountain of debt where you feel like you can't breathe every morning when you wake up. I know what it's like to have physical problems and not enough strength and don't think I can do enough physically to even overcome them because I can't even do enough exercise to. I know what it's like to think it's hopeless. And let me tell you from the other side of Goliath, you pray and you prepare. And when you prepare, you take these 5 stones and you pick them up and put them in your bag. You define your purpose, and you define a purpose that defines your life. And say, my why is bigger than any why not. It's bigger than I don't have time. It's bigger than there's an awful lot of stuff expected of me. It's bigger than I don't have the money. If your kid was standing in the middle of the freeway, would you stop and debate about whether or not you should go out there and what if there's traffic? No. Your why has to get bigger than your why not. And then that shapes your priorities, changes the order of everything. You realize my job's important, but it's not first. You realize my relationships and friendships are important, but they're not first because this has to be, this is who I am. And I shape it. It's not that I quit doing the other things. David didn't unbecome a shepherd that day. He went back to tending sheep. It's just that this sits at the top. This goes on my calendar first. You persist right in the face of a headwind. And it seems like sometimes you go years with the wind in your face. And you sure would just give anything. And I know what this feels like. You'd give anything to feel it in your sails for 30 minutes. For 30 minutes to feel like the Spirit is moving you along instead of you're facing this resistance. But you persist. You persist because that's how giants fall. They fall after you kill lions and after you kill bears and after you talk your way past soldiers and brothers and kings. Then they fall. And you're patient because you said, this has to be. This is what God wants. And it may take me my whole life. I may be like David Brainerd, who spends my whole life and doesn't think they affected anybody on the mission field. And it's after his death that his wife finds this village that has been evangelized by this one man that David Brainerd affected. It may be something like that, but you're patient because you go, this must be. And finally, you realize this can't be unless I'm in partnership with God. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builder labors in vain. And you say, Lord, partnership, though, doesn't mean it's all on Him either. Partnership means I'm going to do everything. Everything you give me, I'm going to hold it with the principle in mind that he who's faithful in little, God will make ruler of much. That every single inch of ground you give me is an opportunity to show you I deserve another foot, another 2 feet, another yard. I believe, according to the statistics I read, most of the people in this room can identify a giant in their life. Can I tell you? God and you can bring him down. And it might come down with the first stone. David got him on the first one, but it may take all 5 of them. It's okay. Be ready to fling them all 5. Let's stand together. I want to pray with you for a minute. Lord, I thank you that while giants are intimidating to me, they're not to you. In fact, they're tiny to you. Your word tells us you hold rivers in the hollow of your hand. And the most amazing part is that you desire partnership with me. In fact, you didn't demand that I come to you. You came to me to develop that and establish that partnership. And your Spirit lives in me every day, every single morning when I wake up and I stare at that giant for 40 days in my face. Your Spirit is right there beside me saying, come on, let's go. Keep moving, keep persisting, be patient. We will handle this. I'm going to ask you, we're going to do one last song, and I'm going to ask you just to take a moment.